welcome to all. I welcome you all to this national webinar, Trends of Research in English Studies. On behalf of Theivanai Ammal College for Women, I am delighted to welcome our today's resource person, Dr. Bindu Nair, Associate Professor of English, Sanatana Dharma College, Kerala, for accepting our invitation. Welcome, ma'am. I
Welcome. Thank
warmly
you very much.
Yes. I warmly welcome our optimistic Secretary, Sir, Mr. S. Sendil Kumar of ESSK Educational Charities, who always motivates us in all endeavors. Though he is not here, I welcome him. Welcome, sir. I am very much delighted to welcome our vibrant registrar, Sir, Dr. E. Soundarajan of ESSK Educational Charities, who encourages us to do many programs like this. Welcome, sir. I'm very happy to welcome our active principal, Madam Dr. M. Brinda, for her continuous support. Welcome, ma'am. I extend my warm welcome to administrative officers, heads of the department, my colleagues, students, professors, and students of various colleges. I welcome you one and all to this national webinar. I'm very happy to introduce our today's resource person, that is Dr. Bindu Nair. And she is Associate Professor of English, Sanatana Dharma College, Alappuzha, Kerala. And she has got 28 years of committed teaching experience in UG and PG level. And she specialized in language and communication studies, gender studies, subaltern studies, eco-critical studies, disability studies, translation, Indian literature, and add-on. And she has PhD from Mahatma Gandhi University, Kerala, and that too in Maheshwata Devi's work. And then she has presented many papers and seminars, published articles and translation in national and international accredited journals and popular publications that she has placed. And she has given many talks and lectures in seminars. And she seems to be the curriculum revision committee member of University of Kerala, and she's co-authored English for Careers book. And currently she is a member of Board of Studies, PG, University of Kerala, and she is a recognized supervisor under the University of Kerala, and she has got 4 research scholars under her. She has 3 levels of training in academic leadership in SAM, Thought, MS, workshop of UGC in 2012. And she functioned as a moderator come translator in national studies, that is Students' Parliament, Kerala Legislative Assembly in February 2018. And she served as a coordinator of Women's Studies Cell, an IQAC member, and NAC Streaming Committee member, and many more. And she's a life member of All India Association for Women's Studies. And I can add on about our resource person. I'm very happy and very proud to say about her resource person. And this topic, what we have just taken as a recent trends of research in English studies, is really a typical topic. And the resource person has taken it very challengingly, because to talk on literature is very easy, but giving equal importance to literature and language is really very difficult. Everyone is interested to learn about the recent trends of research in literature as well as in language. Many researchers are interested to do research on literature but not in language. I hope this national webinar will induce the interest of the researchers equally in both aspects. Now I request our resource person, Dr. Bindu Nair. On the whole, I welcome her. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. I invite our principal, Madam Dr. M. Brinda, Theivanai Ammal College for Women, for the keynote address.
Good afternoon to all. India was once the largest and greatest achievement of the Great Britain, the home of the English language. Millions of Indians learned English as the lingua franca of the British Raj. Milton Keats and Wordsworth were household names for a long-time Western authorship was the only available source of English literature. Some of those authors like Rudyard Kipling tried to write about India as well. I think the lesser we speak about better. However, our culture started to digest the tongue of the Queen and great poets like Kamala Suraya, Rabindranath Tagore, Sarojini Naidu, A.K. Ramanujam, etc. penned English literature for Indians. English as a language of communication played a major role in the freedom movement United Nations. The flavor of nationalism and themes centered around common Indian man were prevalent. However, the post-colonial India could not boast of continuing this literary tradition. Maybe due to some influence on English Indian literature, the literary material became increasingly pretentious. And the common man was replaced by caricatures of the ragging rebel. This had the effect of urban bias, and English literature became alienated from the common man. The monolingual policies of literary themes made English into a language of convenience that too affordable only for the urban elite. Honestly speaking, we have to agree that even amongst the learned population of India, applying the old methods and concepts will not be a viable option because it has only worsened the language ability from generation to generation. New research methods to include bilingual approach in teaching culturally relevant themes in literature are essential to enrich the current generation through English literacy. I hope this webinar explored methods to implement English as a language of communication, medium of learning, and more importantly, a common platform of nationalist discourse. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for the warm keynote what you have presented about English literature and language. Now I invite Dr. E. Soundarajan, Registrar, ESSK Educational Charities for the felicitation.
Most respected resource person, Dr. Bindu Nair, Associate Professor Kerala, respected Principal, Vice Principal, HOD and faculties, dear participants, good afternoon to all of you. First, let me thank the organizing committee for this opportunity given to me. Our secretaries are conveyed best wishes for every success of this webinar. Today's chief guest, Dr. Bindu Nair, in spite of tight schedule, kindly given her consent to act as a resource person. Once again, on behalf of management and on my own behalf, I extend a warm welcome to you, madam. Theivanai Ammal College for Women was started in the year 1989 with the motto of women empowerment in the Villupuram district. Villupuram district is one among the 250 most backward districts in India. Our college produced more than 15,000 women graduates in this backward area. Theivanai Ammal College for Women is working as autonomous institution since 2009 and NAC third reaccreditation with A grade. College has conferred 12B and 2F status and secured 83rd place at all India level among 35,000 private colleges as per the survey conducted by Education Board. College is signed MOU with foreign universities for student exchange program. Faculties are encouraged by the management for their publications. Seed money given by the management for the faculties, those who are publishing their articles in the Scopus Index and UGC journals. During this pandemic situation, our benevolent management rendered valuable services to the society. In association with the state government to safeguard the people, our management contributed nearly 50 lakhs to the Corona Relief Fund. I express my heartfelt thanks to the management for their untired service to the society. I congratulate the English department for choosing a right topic, recent trends in research in English studies. Research in English language and literature at the beginning of the 21st century covers a very broad span. The disciplines has traditionally included linguistic studies of English and related varieties and branches of English literacy studies from Old English and early Renaissance literature to modernism and up to the present. But such an outline obscure and astonishingly wide range and such breadth has now achieved official sanction in the UK government's recent public assessment of its universities of 2014. The field of English literature, language and literature, a vast variety of topics, clearly a discipline that can contain such a extremes in capacious indeed, so capacious that it may arguably be rather hard to describe it as a discipline at all. More positively, it may be argued that this variety indicates a healthy willingness to interrogate the basis of subject in the line with modern trends to interdisciplinary. I am sure that this webinar is more useful to the participant to learn more about recent trends of research in English studies. I wish every success of this webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. And it's time for the long-awaited process, what we are waiting for. Now I request a resource person, Dr. Bindu Nair, Associate Professor of English, Sanatana Dharma College, Kerala, to ignite us. What is this recent trends of research in English studies? It's time to you, madam.
Thank you, Shobhya ma'am. At the outset, let me thank the faculty as well as the management of Theivanai Ammal College, especially the president of today's meeting, Mr. N. Senthil Kumar. I think he's not here. Thank you for inviting me, and the respected registrar, Dr. E. Soundararajan, who just spoke to us. Thank you for that very warm welcome, sir. I'm happy to be here as part of the academic activities of your institution. You have just talked about how your institution is one of the premier upcoming institutions in the area of women's empowerment, especially. That's very happy news. Especially because of that, I'm very happy to be part of this academic program that you're conducting. I also thank Dr. Brinda, the principal of the college. We just interacted for a few minutes before the program. I'm sure she's the right person to lead the college at this time. So thank you, Dr. Brinda. I'm happy to be part of this program. And I also thank Ms. Rajeshwari, who's going to be Assistant Professor of English, who's going to present the vote of thanks. I've been interacting with Shobhya ma'am for the past few days, and she's a very friendly and a very resourceful person. I also met Mr. Senthil, who's the technical expert here in your program. So thank you once again for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. So shall I go into the topic as such?
Yes, ma'am. Sure.
Just give me a few minutes to
Okay.
share my screen. Yeah.
Yes.
So has it appeared, Shobha? Shobhya ma'am?
Yes, ma'am. Waiting for. We didn't get that screen. Share it, madam.
Yeah. Now it's come, I suppose.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Yes. So I was just listening to what your principal, Dr. Brinda and Dr. Soundararajan was saying. And I think, the perspective that you have given is absolutely right. You were talking about how English is no more the language of the colonial masters, and how English has gone far beyond that. And in fact, it has come down to us. And we, the people of the world in different countries, we are using English today as our language. And also, you also talked about the other aspect, that is the aspect of literature and culture, about how we should all be talking about our own cultures, right? Rather than talking about just the British and the Western cultures that we have been talking about for so long. Now, this is precisely the point at which I would like to start my lecture. Yeah. Because the recent trends in research in English studies, as both of you pointed out, and as Shobhia ma'am also pointed out, is an area that is vastly, growing and also vastly interdisciplinary. If you, which is precisely what research is all about in one sense. Today, when we talk about research, we generally start with a search. So especially students, they think that a search is research. Whenever we even if you have to buy a TV or a new brand of toothpaste, you do a research. You do a literal research these days. You search the product and you research the product before buying it. So that, what does that actually tell us? Just a mere search on the net is probably only the first step to actual research. What it actually tells us is that there is a profusion of knowledge about every subject today, right? We live in this world of what we call the knowledge explosion. There's so much of literature, there is so much of writing, there is so much of knowledge in every field that is available to everyone. And it's not just there, but it is also accessible and available to everyone out there in the world. So in one sense, everybody becomes researchers. We are always researching any kind of new thing that comes across our way in daily lives. So research is, when we talk about academic research, we are talking about the ultimate aim for every researcher is to try and find out something new, isn't it? That is the general perspective that all of us have as far as research is concerned. We attempt to find out something new, to reach new knowledge, to generate new knowledge. While that is not just what research is all about, is what all of us know. I've just put a small definition of research there, which is not a very, it's not the ultimate definition, but research involves a lot of things. It's the creation of new knowledge, yes, which is all our primary aim, but it is also about existing knowledge. Research need not always generate new knowledge, but generally the process of research involves looking at the already existing knowledge in the light of other new types of knowledge, isn't it? So, as DSL8 says, nothing is absolutely new. Whatever you say is never always original. But research is this process of passing from the past to the present and into the future, because there is so much new, where as far as content or perspectives and theories are concerned, there is a lot of new knowledge being generated in different fields, and all these different fields seem to impinge on each other. They seem to, reflect upon each other, and that is the only way that research can progress now. Because it's not just about finding something that nobody else has seen before or said before. It is very often just about shedding new light or seeing things in a different way from which it was earlier seen. Even in science, we see how even Einstein's theories, they say, are being reworked. So every new researcher always has to start from already existing knowledge, right? And we have to bring in whatever new perspectives that are existing around us, and also in between that you have to slowly work in your own perspective. So it's not an easy thing to do, and it therefore requires a lot of dedication. It requires a lot of attention, and it's a kind of a continuous process. Research is almost like a lifestyle, right? You have to spend a lot of time and energy and your life itself, and it can sometimes be a life-changing experience when you actually go into the whole concept and the whole process of research. So basically we look at perspectives. I will just be talking about some of the perspectives of research that are relevant to our area, that is English studies, and some of the methodologies that might be useful to us. Okay, so the way I plan to go about this is I'm just looking at two focal points. 2 points that actually I was very happy to hear that both the speakers, your principal as well as your registrar, actually spoke about those points. So I think everybody in the academic field knows how important those 2 points are. So I will be focusing on the point of interdisciplinarity and about the local, and focusing on the local, and try to relate them to four major areas of research in English studies, because we cannot look at everything together. Research also involves, the whole academic process of research. That is the what we call the nitty gritty, the ABCD of research. How to go to the library, using library resources, the methodologies, and everything else. Writing papers, the writing skills that you need. We are not going into all that. I'm just going to give you an overview of some of the areas that are open to research today. If you look at some of the methodologies, methodologies in research have been seen or divided and classified in different ways. I'm not going into all those ways, but only what 4 or 5 methodologies which might be relevant to the English perspective. In science, generally they use the quantitative methodology. That is, they start with a particular kind of premise and they work towards finding results and work towards finding an outcome. And the process or the methods that they use include collection of data and using surveys, and many different methods can be used. And applying statistical analysis, getting your variables clear and applying. And generally, you find the use of deductive reasoning also. So that is generally the method that is used in science, although there are other methods too. Qualitative research is what generally is applicable to our stream, the social constructivist paradigm, as it is called, in which we actually talk about how everything is constructed, how reality is constructed, how the self is constructed, how all social and political structures are constructed, and the way that we use theoretical lenses. We generally have a certain theoretical arc. We can analyze any social or narrative experiences. It could be a social experience, it could be psychological personal experiences, or an analysis of a narrative using one particular or one or more theories. This is how we generally go about doing research, isn't it? This is the method that is generally used in literary studies, also cultural studies. It is related to human experience, where we analyze human experience and generally use inductive reasoning, although both these methods of reasoning are possible. And there is a little bit of flexibility overlapping in all these experiences, in both these methods. A very popular method these days is what you call the pragmatic method, which is actually a bit more flexible, and you can use different methodologies of research are used in the pragmatical approach. It is sometimes increasingly being used in literature also, because earlier quantitative analysis was not used much in research, in English research. But today, since English studies is more cultural studies than purely literary studies, both these approaches, different data sources. It's not just literary texts alone which are being used today. We have different sources. We also go to real sources. Real analysis of actual populations and all. Different methods, different researchers also. This point is also very important here, the idea of researcher, because we will discuss this a little in more detail as we go to the next slides. The actual participants in the research also become very important there. It's not just that you are studying about something or you're researching about something that is unconnected to you, but the connection between the researcher and the subject also becomes slightly more important here, which is also a point which is very important when you talk about advocacy or participatory research. Now, this kind of methodology is being increasingly used in literary studies these days, because we are all living in the age of political activism. So we have political, social, environmental activism becoming very popular and very important. Not just popular, people are not doing it just for popularity's sake, but they are doing it because actually they believe in it, and there is a need to do these things now. It's not just on the discourse level, it's not just on the level of discourse that research is being conducted, but on the actual ground level, where you have activism, political, social, environmental activism being part of research. And especially it could be targeted, not targeted exactly, the subject of such kind of research could be related to vulnerable groups. It could be ecologically vulnerable or politically, in terms of caste, in terms of gender, in terms of identity, right? And there, that is where the concept of the co-researcher also becomes important. So in this kind of research, the actual people who are involved in this particular problem, you know and this particular problem, we always have a research problem. So the problem that we are researching, the people who are actually involved there very often become co-researchers. So now this is a very important trend that we see in contemporary research. Now we'll talk a little more about it when we come to the areas of research. So these are generally the more commonly used methods, or the methods that are being increasingly used in contemporary research. Now, we cannot go into all the areas of English studies. Humanities, generally, as we know, now the perspective, when you look at the perspective aspect, um, unlike science, literature has a very wide variety. While in science, you find that methodology is more important. While in literature, it is the perspective, which was at least earlier much more important than the methodology in one sense. And what we mean by perspective, in generally, in when we talk about literature, is what we call literary theory, right? All the different kinds of theories, in particular areas that are relevant to the humanities. And from earlier times itself, from the early 20th century onwards, we have seen how literature, the theories of literature, are related to not just literature alone, but slowly we started having culture studies. So in the 50s, when culture studies came, so and till then we had literature was analyzed either with the sociological aspect or from a historical perspective. And then in the late Victorian period, we have the psychological perspective coming in with Freud and analysis like that. And historical, social, and political perspectives have always been part of literary theory for quite some time. But linguistics, for example, came into the picture in the early 20th century, and anthropology also. Along with structuralism, you have anthropology, the perspectives of anthropology in different cultures, and also the theories of race and things like that. So, but in the late 50s, you see culture theories coming in, and popular theories about popular culture. The whole idea of two kinds of literature, high literature and low literature, and artistic and popular. Those distinctions slowly are removed, and everything comes under the area, the aegis of culture studies, the umbrella of culture studies. And later we have, especially recently, we have media, the theories of media gaining a lot of importance because of the boom in technology, communication, and the growth of the unprecedented growth of the mass media. The influence of mass media in the form of film or television, generally all the visual media, and other, what we call journalistic media, news and print media, and other visual media which is related to news. So media is one area which has a lot of relevance and relation to English studies today. So is ecology and the environment. As we know, this is a most pressing issue today. Uh, if it was, the post-colonial, the caste, race, these issues, today the issue of ecology and environment has a kind of an overreaching effect upon all the theoretical areas that we have been exploring till now. uh, of course, in between we have all the other theories of gender, of caste, class, culture, identities, everything coming in, which comes within all many of these areas like politics or culture. Now, these are generally the theoretical areas that are part of the discussions, or the areas of research that we see in literary studies today. Now, I would like to focus today on two uh, points, which are, according to my reading, most important in contemporary research. And one of the most important things is interdisciplinarity, as I think your principal as well as your registrar mentioned. Indeed, it is the order of the day. Interdisciplinarity is one of the most important things that we have to understand and accept and incorporate in our research these days. Why? Why? Because mainly because of the knowledge explosion. I mean, there is so much knowledge today about every available subject on earth. There is nothing that is not being studied today, right? And the whole world is studying and generating knowledge on almost everything under the sun. We cannot say under the sun, maybe above the sun and below the sun and around the sun always. There is no corner of the created universe that is not being that is not brought under the lens of the human eye, is what we probably have to say, because we are, the human beings are continually studying about everything under the sun, and knowledge is being revised at a much faster rate than it was, say, a century back. That is the most important thing here. What was knowledge maybe just 5 years back is old knowledge, and something new has already turned up in the next 5 years. That is probably also because of the effect of technology, because the spread, not just the generation of knowledge, but the spread of knowledge is very high. Every knowledge has become specialized. Knowledge has become so specialized that it is not possible for us to make the kind of generalizations that we used to do earlier in literary studies. Okay? And also, there is a whole set of discourses about every particular area of knowledge today, which is available in the public domain, and also in specialized searches. So in today's research has to be informed research. We have to know what is going on. So when whatever topic, whatever area you're working in, it will naturally have, or by default, every literary topic, every topic of research in English studies is interdisciplinary, because it automatically becomes connected to a lot of areas of knowledge that are available today. Knowledge is different areas of knowledge are impinging on each other. So it's not that we can say I don't know about it, or I don't think it's available. There's no information. There is information. There is always information, and it is your duty to see that this information reaches you, or you reach the information. We cannot excuse ourselves in today's world by saying that I don't know, or I haven't heard of it. There are a trillion ways, a million ways of actually finding out whatever you want to find out. And derived knowledge, again, is not encouraged in research these days. By derived knowledge, what I mean is second hand knowledge. So the researcher is expected to actually know, uh, to make a personal effort to know things, not just quote someone and uh, take lift knowledge from here. This is also related to the issue of plagiarism, and what we call knowledge, you know, uh, property, what do you call, the intellectual property rights and all that. Because you can't just lift knowledge from somewhere and say that, I found it here, I found it there. So it's very important for us not only to check and to find out and to know the sources of knowledge, and also the context of any kind of information or knowledge that we need, or what is relevant to our research. So informed research is a kind of research that you do with a very clear focus on where your sources of information come from, where your sources of knowledge come from. And it is, it is imperative that you check, and that you go ahead and not just check the sources, but actually try to know and interrelate the areas of knowledge that are relevant to your topic. Now, interdisciplinarity is not something which is absolutely new. As we said earlier, uh, literature for quite some time, it has been influenced by literary theory. As I said earlier, art, the theories of art, what we call all our earlier theories of, remember our artistic theories of formalism, of expressionism, theories of art, basically painting and design, and our art and aesthetic theories. They were always relevant to our literary research, right? Literary theory was what we were focusing on. Theories about art, about style, about form. And then in the early 20th century, linguistics and the um, influence of the formal school of criticism, and then structuralism and semiotics, in which everything started to be studied as a kind of as a sign. And then it goes on to the multiple levels of meaning. And history, looking at literary narratives in the light of history. Then gender theories, theories of race, theories of globalization, culture and media theory. These were all the interdisciplinary areas that have been, that have been, are being worked in, or are being used in literary studies for quite some time, for more than a century maybe. But today, in today's world, it is much broader than that. It's not just about literary theory alone. The realm of knowledge is so wide today, and maybe life is so interconnected today, that it is not just about the closed world of narrative and of literary theory alone, but it's a much wider uh, realm that we are talking about. For example, if we are talking about eco literature, for example, climate fiction, or activist performative ecological movements, if you're trying to make any interventions as far as ecological movements are concerned, things like Chipko movement and all that. That is, if you're doing any kind of research in eco literature or climate literature, you have to be aware of a lot of areas in environmental science. And environmental science is an area which has around 5 or 6 subgenres, sub areas, uh, which includes climate studies, which includes environmental chemistry, it includes geosciences. So there is this very wide, it's a huge discipline. It's an absolutely huge discipline. And socio-cultural aspect is just one aspect of environmental science. I'll be talking about environmental science later, so we will do it then. But what I just want to point out is that the interdisciplinary aspects of a particular topic that we have to do. If you're doing eco literature, you have to be aware. Of course, we can't study environmental chemistry and geoscience and everything together, but at least a minimum awareness of, or at least and awareness and a real knowledge of the things that pertain to your research is becomes absolutely necessary. You cannot talk about about water and all unless you know about pollution and at least the basic facts about ecosystems or whatever area that you're researching. Another example could be that of pandemic literature, or any kind of literature, that is, because this is a big thing in literary studies these days. Pandemic literature, literature about pain, about disease, right? You have cancer narratives and things like that. Now medicine, medicine is such a huge area, and a lot of knowledge is available to a lot of people. And this kind of this area of medicine and science is very important when you're doing research in such areas. So a kind of informed knowledge is necessary when you're doing it. Now, for example, one of the most important or rather popular areas of research today is posthumanism, right? So, posthumanist narratives. If you're doing work on science fiction or posthumanism, you see that science, genetics, technology, machines, artificial intelligence, as well as philosophy are all the interdisciplinary areas that come within this or that come within the ambit of the field of posthumanism. You can't just do a posthumanist study unless you actually know what humanist philosophy is all about. What has been the perception of man? What is the philosophy of man? Humanist philosophy down the ages. Artificial intelligence, the relationship between man and machine, the the impinging relationships of technology, the study of genetics about what we call biotechnology and genetics, about how science has been trying to modify the natural process and all that. So there's a lot of research and there are lots of ideas that are there out there in these areas, which actually have to be included, or you should know what is being talked about in those areas if you're doing research on, say, science fiction. We know many science fiction writers, and obviously they have quite a it's not just a working knowledge, a much higher level of knowledge of science than the ordinary person. So this is the importance of interdisciplinarity. If you're doing work on film, television, or the OTT platform, which is a very popular area today, right? Communication technology, theories about mass media, about the industry, about consumerism, about advertising, about mass culture. All these are the theories, or the areas of knowledge that you will have to actually study if you're doing research on, say, film or television or any other popular mass media. If you're doing research on graphic narratives, for example, it's not just literature, but also art and design technology, which is important there. If you're doing research on tribal or Dalit literature, for example, you have to go into the whole history of anthropology, of political, of cultural, and of historical narratives. So this is the importance of interdisciplinarity, the importance of informed research, which cannot be actually stressed too much. That is one of the most important things that we have to keep in mind when you uh, go in for a research. Now, another important point that I would like to focus on is the relevance of the global, or rather, relevance of rather than the global, the relevance of the local. As your principal and as your registrar was saying, I was very happy when I heard them saying that, because this is the focus of research actually today. Because, knowledge was considered something that was universal. And of course, we had the canon of, in a colonial age, whatever colonial knowledge was universal knowledge. But today, of course, the empire is writing back, and the importance of the local cannot be stressed enough. And the emphasis on research today is on local knowledge. It's not just about resisting globalization alone, although that is also a very important, reason why the stress on the local comes, because resisting globalization is what we have to do. But it is also about verifiable knowledge, as I said earlier. If you the whole concept of derived knowledge, you can only talk about what you actually know, is again one focus that is coming into research these days. That we talk about Black American novels, or we talk about Latin American fiction. How much do you actually know about that culture is a question that is being asked to us these days. So especially if you go for international conferences or even national conference, especially in a place like India. Our country is a multicultural and multilingual country, as we all know. So if you go to national conferences, what are you bringing from your own language? What are you bringing from your own literature? What are you bringing from your own culture? Is what everybody is looking at. That is a very important focus today in not just in a country like India, but in the world scenario also, because the emphasis on local knowledge, on generating, or when we talk about the canon, as I said, much of the knowledge related to third world countries, or we don't like to call ourselves third world countries, but that's how they still call us. So the non-European countries and the non powerful countries, that kind of knowledge, which was earlier you know sort of considered to be exotica and all that, but rather than exotica, it is the kind of knowledge that we are living in, right? So again, when you talk about verifiable knowledge, earlier we were talking about the sources of knowledge. See, if you are talking about something that very well, in your area, in your language, your culture, that is verifiable knowledge, because you are part of it, and you are yourself uh, able to talk about the authenticity of that knowledge. And it, in a sense, it leads to a lot of academic integrity. uh, and of course the copyright issues are there, but basically it lends a certain kind of authenticity to the kind of to your research, because there you are actually talking about shedding light on certain areas which are relevant to you. So for example, you can talk about local languages, Tamil or Malayalam. Today English studies need not be about English literature alone. We all know that, right? But we cannot emphasize it enough. You can talk about Malayalam literature, you can talk about Tamil literature, you can talk about any literature under the sun, provided it's your literature, isn't it? Languages, linguistic studies based on the peculiarities of your language, your literature, history, local history is a very, very important area of research today. What we call the small narratives, the little narratives, not just the grand narratives of the larger picture, but the little narratives, the little stories, the stories of little places, of little people, of smaller places, smaller cultures. So whatever is about arts, about craft, about the industry, about architecture, about the particular environment, the peculiarities of the environment of local places, this is one of the most important focal points of research today. So if you can do something that is related to your particular, locality, your particular, your own culture, that would be one of the most, significant ways in which you could contribute towards generating real, authentic knowledge. There, when we go back, when we talk about the kind of methodology that we were talking about, remember we talked about participatory research. All these, this becomes very important in with this focus. When you look at research, when you look at a particular topic from this particular focus, the focus of the local, that kind of research becomes very important. If there are certain crafts or art objects, or artistic traditions, the traditions of food, the traditions of culture in your particular area, in your particular culture, which are worth talking about. And who decides what is worth talking about? We decide what is worth talking about. So that is something that you can always talk about, right? So there is nobody to come here and talk, and talk to, and find out these things. We ourselves are the ones who are doing the talking about our own cultures. That is probably the focus of today's research. You can talk about anything that is local, provided it is is written in the English language. And we are this is one way of creating, of generating new information, new knowledge, and uh, and kind of making a pathway for the entry of these little narratives, our own stories, the local stories, into the larger stream of mainstream canonized literature or globalized literature. Not that that is the ultimate aim, but today the whole perspective of narrative itself is like that. The whole perspective of literature itself is that the canon is always being questioned. and the canon is always being rewritten. So the importance of the local is cannot be stressed enough here. Now, with that focus area, we'll just quickly examine some of the broad areas of literary studies which I will be looking at today. The broad areas, of course, are literature and culture studies, language studies, environmental studies, and media studies. These are, according to my perspective, some of the areas where more research is being done these days. So if we look at literature studies, it is too vast an area to actually talk about. Shobya ma'am was asking me, how am I going to manage literature studies? So I said, see, there is no way of managing literary studies in any way. It is a veritable minefield, and you can talk about anything. We have all the traditional sources of literature: British, American, Irish, English literature, what we call English literature, being written in the English language: British, American, Irish, Australian, Canadian, New Zealand, Caribbean, Indian, South Asian. We have plenty of Englishes today. So all the literatures that are written in all these languages. But again, if we keep in mind the focus of the local and of interdisciplinarity, there again you can narrow down on what exactly you want to do. Okay. So why would we want to talk about British literature is one question. But that does not prevent you from talking about British literature if you want to, provided you are, authentic enough in talking about it. And it depends upon your perspective and the kind of theory that you want to put forward. So this vast area of literature is there before you, open, which anyone can enter and talk about. Then, of course, there is world literature, not written in the English language. What I meant was not written in the English language, and literature that is written in languages other than English. Of course, generally in India, especially in Kerala. In Kerala, we are all big fans of Latin American literature. So there is this whole, library of Latin American literature open to you, which you can enter into. Then, if you look at the categories of literature, so we won't go much into that because we know that there are, that area is very vast and you can enter it and choose anything that you like. Uh, Generally, we have the theoretical lens, right? You start with as they say in qualitative research, the kind of research that we do, we generally have a theoretical lens. We use a theoretical lens. Generally, the lens of it could be anything. It could be gender, it could be race, class, caste, identity, nationalism, politics, sociology, any kind of literature any kind of theory that you want to. So that depends upon your interest. What exactly you want to, what is the perspective that you want to bring in. These perspectives are what we call things that are generated out of what we call literary theories. You could be talking about examining in a particular text from the lens of art and aesthetics, or from gender, from race, from class, anything. That depends upon our interest. What is the theoretical lens that you want to do? And with that, you can enter into any of these areas of literature. And tribal and Dalit literature, of course, in India is always a topic that cannot be studied enough. Much has been, not because of because it is fashionable to do it, but because it is important to do it, right? Because when we talk about minority groups, it is always important that their voice be heard. And this is where the importance of the methodology that we have to follow comes in. The point that I was talking about earlier, that is the the methodology of advocacy or participatory. The methodology of advocacy or participatory research becomes important here, especially when we are talking about vulnerable groups and co-researchers. Remember the question that Gayatri Spivak asked: "Can the subaltern speak?" So the perspective was that who are we to speak for them? Okay, so rather than speak for them, their how they become co-researchers, and the importance of their voice being heard, their stories being told in their own words. All these perspectives come in here. So that is the one thing that we have to pay attention to when we do research in this area. Rather than, the perspective is very important there, about whether you're trying to objectify them. The possibilities of museumization and objectification are there, the issues are there. So rather than look at it as an exotic area of research, a more realistic, and as I said, an activistic participatory perspective should be brought in there. And people who belong to their those communities themselves are being encouraged to, or they are doing their research on their own in one sense. So that is also an important thing that is being done. Then, of course, we have this wide area. We have children's literature, which is a very, very wide area of research. There are multiple genres there, and languages there. There again, the importance of the local is very important. When we talk about English literature, children's literature, especially in India, when we have such a wonderful tradition of children's literature, and I think each language and each culture has its own children's literature. So that is an area that is just waiting there to be explored. And we also have a kind of a pan-Indian culture also, right? A whole tradition of children's literature. Then you have humor, which is not an area which is being explored too much these days, but it is there left to be explored. Then, of course, the trend for life writings. So rather than fiction, the area of life writings. Earlier, we used to call them autobiographies, but today they are not just autobiographies. They can be looked at, of course, from different perspectives, testimonials. And another important area is travel literature. That is also one area which is very important now. Not in the earlier sense of, as I said, exotic locales and exoticizing place, but rather a kind of immersing experience, and how the whole concept of travel, of sports, of adventure, of tourism, of how travel and tourism are being clubbed together, and how the concepts of tourism actually affect the way that you look at travel and adventure, which was and the difference between new ways in which you look at it from the old way in which travels and adventures were conducted. So the whole idea of the self and everything is important there. So that is, travel literature again is an area that is being explored these days. Memory and trauma studies again becomes an area that is important. uh, uh, I'm not going deeply into any of these areas, but they are areas which are being studied. Memory, not just about personal memory, but also about public memory, right? So, memory studies is being discussed very widely in India today. Uh, the disability studies again. So there, when we talk about disability studies, also instead of here's a new area, the new trend. Rather than that, as I said earlier, the perspective of research is very important here. The researcher also is very important. It's not about talking for the hearing impaired. Like you become the speaker for them, or talking about the blind, but how they themselves, uh, the people who are differently able themselves, are coming more and more into their own, and talking about their own experiences. So the lens of participatory, or the methodology of participatory research, and as I said earlier, the question of authenticity, also becomes very important here, because the earlier perspective has changed today, and you have to take into consideration the methodology that is being used. And again, here the importance of the activist or the participatory mode of research becomes very important. uh, then, of course, gender studies is an area that is very, very important, is always relevant, because we are talking about half the population of the world. And gender studies, again, is an interdisciplinary area. When we're talking about gender studies, we cannot just talk about purely uh, the depiction of gender in texts. This is what we usually do, which is still what we do. We can do. We're not saying we cannot do. But the larger questions of gender, the socio-cultural and political questions of gender also become very important here. So the interdisciplinary areas of gender, and also the opening up of gender studies to include third and fourth and fifth genders, and all the other the whole area of other genders, not just the male and female. We know the LGBTQ community and all those areas are also there left to be explored, which is very important, and it is being worked continually. There is always more scope for work in that area. Then, of course, medical literature is, especially after the pandemic, since we have the pandemic going on now, that has become an area which is being explored now. It is an ongoing thing. There we have had a history of pandemic literature actually, and people are actually talking about it right now. Revisiting the canon of pandemic literature and looking at how human beings have dealt with it and all that. And as we said earlier, all those in the area of disease and pain and all that, palliative care. Recently, there was a discussion on care actually, about how diseases, rather than how they affect the people who are subjected to the disease, but how they actually affect the people who care for them. For example, patients who have things like Alzheimer's, diseases like Alzheimer's, and how the people who care for them, the trauma and the experiences that they go through. So such studies are also ongoing. And we have this huge area of science fiction, of fantasy, dystopia, utopic fiction, right? Sci-fi, detective fiction. These are all areas that are open. In fact, India and the Indian tradition of detective fiction, of science fiction, is being explored today. And people are trying to find out all the old, the hidden and the lost stories of science fiction that were being written. Recently, they were saying in Malayalam also a lot of science fiction had been written earlier, which was sort of lost in the larger picture of Western science fiction. So again, the importance of the local traditions and how these areas were being explored by the indigenous or the local writers and thinkers. Post-humanist narratives is again a very important area. I'm not going into it or anything. All of us are aware of it. It is an area which actually crosses many of these disciplines, right? It goes across all the disciplines, or rather all the areas that we were talking about. It cuts across almost every genre, and all the topics that we talked about earlier, the kinds of writing that we're talking about earlier, for example, children's fiction or anything like science fiction, fantasy, all that, dystopic, dystopian fiction, utopic fiction, all this comes under the ambit of post-human narratives. A lot of traditional literature is also being reworked and being looked at once again from the lens of post-humanism. So that is one of the most, one of the burgeoning fields that we have today. And another area, of course, is historical fiction, with a lot of the topics like wars, and not just wars, rather the question of migrations, of border disputes, and you know uh, the refugees, the question of violence of refugees, of their stories of survival, and as we said earlier, life writings and testimonials. Uh, this is also an area which is being explored in different dimensions. And another area which is very important today is that of graphic and common studies, as you all know, which includes a lot of graphics, the theories of art, of visuals, of space, of design. Then also, apart from graphic novels and comic studies, you also have the area of public art, as they call it, graffiti, posters, the public, what we call the public space being used as an art space. And that again is an area that can be explored. Now, the next area, of course, is culture and media studies. This is one of the, it's the a very vast area. If we start with film studies, I don't know how to go into film studies, because the very name, all of you, everybody listening to this will surely know the depth of the and the width of the area of film studies. You can do anything in film studies. You can study well, films that are made in every language. You can look at the you can do semiotic analysis, you can do cultural studies, you can do uh, theoretical studies, you can do studies based on form and design and filmmaking, the techniques of filmmaking. Anything is open to you. So again, the themes of the local again become very important there. And especially the study of what we call mainstream cinema in culture studies, right? The influence of film is very important on the populations. Film as a mass medium. So all those areas of study which are related to uh, film as a mass medium, which has power, over the masses in creating cultural consent and things like that. So all those areas are open. Popular culture, we have already discussed it. Then media, in the sense of other kinds of media, in the sense of communication, of news media, and media can also, in media studies, you also have studies based on language and communication. The kind of in the kind of innovations or the kind of language that is used in media is an area which is being studied not just by linguists alone, but also um, by literature students, by culture studies students also. So the influence of what we call mass media. We can talk about social media, the kind of language that is used in social media, the way that the self is presented in social media. There are lots of areas there that can be explored, about how the power that the media wields, and how it has changed the imagination of people, and also changed the perception of the self, and also how these debates go on in the public sphere. Then we have the new media platforms, OTT, web series. A lot of work is being done in that area. Then the general, the old areas of culture, that is music, dance, and art forms, that is still left there to be explored. This is where the local becomes very important. You can talk about a lot of the cultural aspects of local cultures, and talk about the art forms, and food, fashion, textiles, uh, of particular local areas. So the local flavor, not just the local flavor in the sense of the exotic. Okay, here we can talk about something called localization, which is used in marketing and in business and all that, and where the local flavor is being marketed in one sense. But rather than that, a serious exploration into the actual sustainable ways in which local cultures make use of their resources. So, about sustainable development, about sustainability, and about how traditions have been, preserved and passed on, and also changed in one sense. So, using any kind of theoretical lens, you can go ahead and explore any of these areas. That is one. Now, when we talk about literature, and culture, one particular area that we can always focus on, which is never goes out of fashion in a way, is Indian writing. Right? Uh, Indian writing, not just in English, but also in what we just talked about, our local languages, not just the canonized, institutionalized literature, but the new voices in your own language, new genres, the local, narratives that are produced based on community, on culture, and on orality and folk traditions. The local traditions are something which can be explored. If you're looking into Indian writing in English, also there is a lot of new writing and a lot of new genres, especially in fiction and in young fiction. These are all areas, the young fiction especially. There are areas in which there's a lot of work being done. In sense, a lot of publishing is also being done there. And one area that I feel has always been underexplored is theatre studies in India, actually. Not the not the regional theatre, which is, of course, very rich, but it is being studied. But the Indian English theatre, there is a professional, there's the amateur, there is the experimental and street theatre in India in English, which is one area which is basically focused or it is concentrated on Bombay, Bangalore, and Delhi. And there are also other smaller towns which have English theatre. That is one area which I personally feel has to be explored a little more, which is an area which is open for study. Now, language and ELT. Shobia ma'am, I hope we have time, maybe 10 minutes more.
Yes, we can
Yeah, I
give
have
it.
just 10 minutes more.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So, language and English language teaching, you were also talking about that. Dr. Brinda was also talking about this area. Apart from the approaches to linguistics and language teaching, it is also related to educational reforms that are going on in India today in the educational sector, and we won't go into the traditional language theories. One Today is the era generally of post method. We generally call it the post method era, where multicultural and multi perspectival approaches are being used. And as you already pointed out, uh, again the local becomes important here, about how to teach language, uh, not just teach British pronunciation or American pronunciation, not British English, but how to integrate the local cultures and how to teach English through the local cultures. Language English again just becomes just a language that can be used, and it can be learned along with your mother tongue. So many eclectic methods, different methodologies are being used. That is the post method area. There is no single one method that can be that is advocated, but instead anything that is related, at hand, anything that is at hand for you to use, any resource or any particular situation or context that you can use to teach English, is welcome here. So the emphasis is on the local culture and the different perspectives from different aspects of culture. Then apart from teaching language, there is the emphasis is also additionally given on content, in the sense that language is not related only to literature, but it is also related to subjects. Like even subjects are being taught in language, right? So language teaching methodologies which should take into consideration uh, the subject that is being taught also, the content that is being taught also. Okay, so whether it is science or whether it is commerce. Okay, so the difference in the language, what we call the registers of the language that is used in science and commerce. So language specific technology or strategies that are specific to content is also being given a lot of importance today. And it is also language or methodology is also related to curriculum design, how to design a perfect curriculum, keeping in mind the ideas that were already talked about learning strategies, about how to help students learn better, and also assessment. Again, local and global resources can be used together. So today in the post method area, we see a kind of a judicial use of both global sources as well as local sources. Okay, so like earlier we used to talk about, John talked to Mary kind of sentences, while now we talk more about Ramu gave Raju a guava rather than an apple, kind of thing. So just from simple examples like that, you can use any kind of local resources to in order to help them to learn, uh, starting from contexts and also using the resources of information technology to help us to put across our, to help them learn language better. The areas in ELT today are these: teaching English as a second language, teaching English to speakers of other languages, teaching English as a foreign language, English for specific purposes, ESP, which is what we were just talking about, English for academic purposes, right? So English, for example, in content writing courses, we have, about how to write content for, say, for example, if you want to a product like a television or a mobile phone, that is English for specific purposes. Then you have English for academic purposes, how to write a project and how to write a project in English, how to write a project in science. English for professional purposes, again for career development as you go higher on the professional scale, then CBLI, what we were just talking about, concept-based language instruction. So how the content becomes very important, not just the language, the content, whether it is commerce, whether it is science, whether it is literature. Okay, so content-based language instruction, content and language integrated learning. So we focus on vocabulary, grammar, language skills, and also the needs for specific learners. Since we have specific needs, as the ones that we just talked about, and so language instruction should also be uh, based on or structured according to these specific needs. So these are all areas that uh, are left open for research. Anybody interested in these areas can always go ahead and do work. Now I come to the last area and one of the most important areas that is being explored today, and that is environmental studies, which is, by default, the most interdisciplinary and eclectic of all the uh, areas today that we have today, of the subjects that we can explore today. Basically, the environmental studies has a few sub genres, as sub areas, as I earlier said: social sciences, geosciences or earth sciences, environmental chemistry, ecology, and atmospheric sciences. Now, social sciences is where we are in. And again, the interdisciplinary connections between the social science aspect and the other areas of environmental studies, geoscience, environmental chemistry, ecology, they are all extremely important. Okay. And how the perspective of environmental studies has changed. Earlier, like nature has always been used as an image in literature, right? And we have always been talking about natural imagery. We have pastoral literature, and we talk about the romantics as people who talk about nature. From there, you come to, in the 20th century, we talk about the perspective of ecology, of eco literature, of eco criticism, right? About the anthropomorphic, uh, about how the anthropomorphic perspective should change, and you have an earth-centric, a biocentric view of ecology. So from there we come to environmentalism. So rather than focus on the representation of ecology in literature, you come to the larger picture of environmentalism, about how it affects the ground situation of the lives of people, right? And today we come to climate studies. So what are the reasons when you go to the reason for these changes or for the problems that people face? You come to climate studies. So the progress of environmental studies has been roughly like this, although there are a lot of movements that come in between. Now, when you look at environmental studies, basically there are two or three. Basically, I would say, generally, uh, commonly, there are three ways in which you can approach environmental studies. One is through literary narratives. You can actually go and explore literary narratives, books, poems, you know it could be any genre. It cuts across genres, which is, I talk about it in the next slide. Actually, you have different genres: fiction, poetry, drama, street plays, climate fiction, which we call cli-fi. And we also have themes here. You can analyze literary narratives. You can do a thematic analysis of literary narratives based on place, which is something that we have been doing since, from earlier times also. Remember how we used to look at the dimension of space, of place, in novels like in the Wessex novels and things like that, how place itself becomes a character, the relationship between characters and place. But today, of course, it's a much larger perspective. the actual environmental issues also are related here, and the relationship between humans, animals, plants, and the elements again, especially when we talk about the sea, or the sky, the imaginative, uh, the artistic representations and imaginations of place, of the relationship between place of humans, animals, plants, the different elements of the ecosystem. This was one way in which you can approach environmental studies, a study of literary narratives. Now, another area is the environmental movements. You know, the actual, that is where our earlier participatory approach again becomes important. The study of environmental movements, which is not just about narrative alone, it is also about the actual ground situation, it is actually about the politics and history, and also about the environmental, the actual ecosystems that are involved there. So it involves the local population, specific places, the struggles, right, and the resistances, which is also one area, participatory narratives and movements. So you are ongoing struggles, for example. Like you have earlier movements like the Chipko movement or the Silent Valley movement in Kerala, and then we had the Plachimada issue, right? And you have the issue of endosulfan, things like that. And you have these major disasters and floods not happening. So actual issues, when they actually happen, uh, uh, what you call environmental movements, and also not just about disasters and movements, also about movements in which the environment is being protected. So how in specific local places there are ways in which people are actually trying to make a change, right? Are doing their own, they have their own methods or their own ways of preserving the environment. We know how in Rajasthan we've had one or two movements in which lost rivers were regenerated, and about how particular groves and forests were replanted and protected, about how in specific areas and in different villages in India, people have actually got together and restored nature, restored their ecosystem in different ways. So stories like this of resistances, of struggles, of regeneration, of sustainability, these are all areas that can be explored. So the studies of ecosystems and bioregions. So in your local area, if there are particular areas in which there are, there is a particular ecosystem, there are specific ecosystems. You could be living by the sea. It could be the seaside, the coastal ecosystem. It could be the forest ecosystem or the mangroves. So depending on what the local ecosystem is, there is always a possibility that you can get involved there and talk about and do research in that area, in bioregions and specific ecosystems. Then there are, of course, the larger issues of climate studies, which goes across borders, the Arctic and places in like America and Europe, and the Arctic and the Antarctic, where a lot of climate fiction is being written. Then, as I said, environmental movements involving law, justice, ethics. Then, of course, the question of gender and environmental representation, which is again an area which is uh, never, sort of forgotten in any sense. Ecofeminism, and about how in every environmental issue, it is all the women who bear the brunt of environmental damage and the human suffering that comes through. So, all these areas are areas which can be explored, especially with the emphasis on local struggles, on local problems, on how the local issues of environment actually affect the lives of people, and how change is being engineered, about how there are small resistances and slow movements in which ecological sustainability is being explored and being practiced in local cultures, in local places. Now, that is one of the most important areas of environmental science. Now, these are some of the areas which I think are fertile, for a researcher. You can get into any area and explore. And research is as I said earlier, it's a kind of a life-changing experience if you do it seriously, and if you do it the way that it is supposed to be done, especially with serious involvement, with genuinity, with authenticity. Then it can be part of your journey of life, and it can lead you to a much more meaningful existence than merely just the world of words alone. So through that you reach out to a larger world, which ultimately life is what is more important than anything else. So I wish all of you do take up research. All those who haven't done as yet, please do it. And I wish you all a successful journey in research and a very rewarding experience too. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. You have given an extended definition for research, and really will be an eye-opening thing for all of us. And those who have just seen this program, it will be just good for them to do research. If they have done, it will be helping them for the further thing. And if they have not done PhD, and really will be an eye-opening for them. And thank you for explaining many more things. And here, ma'am, we got a question from the participant,
Yeah,
and
yes.
they are asking us to explain about this Gothic literature or Gothic. Explain
Which-
about Gothic literature or Gothic studies. That is a question it was posted by participants.
I don't think I talked about Gothic literature, right?
So they are asking this question.
Well, actually, Gothic literature is something that is in the European and in the British and American tradition, actually. Well, I was focusing more on the local traditions. Gothic literature, I think today is being reworked in a sense. I think maybe in graphic literature, uh, and maybe science fiction, that area, in children's literature, in science
Yes, ma'am,
fiction,
it's a modern,
yeah, in dystopian
modern
and
sort of
utopian.
class.
Yeah, in that area, I think there is a little bit of reworking of Gothic literature. But basically, whatever Gothic literature existed at that time uh, has already been studied. But today, with the emphasis on, as I said, post-human narratives, like Shelley's Frankenstein and all, are being re-explored now, right? So in science fiction and in utopian and dystopian fiction, that
Yes,
is where I
nowadays
think it is
we
being
have this
reworked.
sort of a thing, dystopian,
Yeah,
utopian, and all. It is just occurring in reality also that we have to see that.
exactly. Yeah,
Yes, the next
fantasy and
question
all that.
they are asking this, which is the best.
And especially in ghost, in ghost stories
Yes,
and all that. I didn't actually go into that area. That if you're interested in it, that is where all these things, and also in graphic literature, actually, because representations of design and art and all, their Gothic literature, I think, is
yes,
has
ma'am.
a
The next question is there, which is the best thing that doing UGC net or
GC net.
PhD. This one they are
That's a life question.
life
That
question.
I think the best way to answer it would be timing, actually,
Yes.
because yeah, what is important for you at a particular time? Like, if you need to go for a job, research is always open all the time.
Yes.
So you can do research after you get a job. You can do research before you get a job. I think it is left to the individual to take a responsible decision, right? The
Yes.
timing, it's your life, so you decide at exactly what moment you want to do it.
And yes, ma'am, I think all the questions have just been covered, and we'll be just moving on towards the end of the program. I request Ms. R. Rajeshwari, Assistant Professor of English, Theivanai Ammal College for Women, for the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon to all. Myself, R. Rajeshwari, Dean Student Affairs and Assistant Professor of English A simple thank you has magic. It warms the heart and creates a moment of connection and peace between people. I take this opportunity to thank the great people who stood for the success of this webinar. Educational leaders are the one who has the will to release leadership to the teachers, to the parents, and to the students. Now, I take this opportunity to thank our leader, 3 Senthil Kumar, Secretary, ESSK Educational Charities, who always inculcates leadership in his people. Though he is not present here, I thank him. A leader is the one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. Now, I thank Dr. E. Soundararajan, Registrar, ESSK Educational Charities, for his guidance and support for all our activities. I thank you, sir. Associating with the wise and the knowledgeable people adds to the prestige of a person. And today, it is added to our prestige because of the acquaintance of our today's chief guest, Dr. Bindu Nair, Associate Professor of English, Sanatana Dharma College, Alappuzha, Kerala. Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your vast knowledge and literature with us. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'm happy to thank our most active principal, Madam, Dr. M. Brinda, for her enduring support. I thank you, ma'am. I thank Ms. R. Shobia, Head and Assistant Professor of English, for her hard work for the success of this webinar. I thank you, ma'am. Now I thank our department faculty members and students for their cooperation. I also extend my gratitude to Dr. Nisha, Kannur University, Kerala, for suggesting such an eminent resource person for the webinar. I thank you, ma'am. Now, I wish to thank faculty and student participants from other colleges for their interest and cooperation for the webinar. I thank you all. Finally, I extend my gratitude to Mr. K. Krishna Kumar and Mr. Sendil Nathan, system admins, for the technical support. Once again, I thank you all.